When the ships returned to the coast of the New World, not a single soul remained. The houses stood empty, the fort was silent, and one strange word was carved into a tree: Croatoan. The year was 1587, a time when England's ambitions stretched across the Atlantic Ocean. Europe was locked in a race, not for gold, not for glory alone, but for a new world. Spain had already claimed vast territories. France was exploring the north. England, under Queen Elizabeth I, wanted her piece of the dream, a colony that would prove England could thrive beyond its cold island shores. So, the dreamers set sail. Among them was John White, an artist, a gentleman, and a man torn between curiosity and caution. He had already seen the New World once before: the tall forests, the endless coastline, the unfamiliar faces of native tribes. But this time, it was different. This time, they were not just exploring, they were building a new England. The destination? A small island off the coast of what we now call North Carolina, Roanoke Island. To the English, it seemed perfect: fertile land, gentle climate, and enough distance from the Spanish threat in Florida. But the settlers didn't know what awaited them: starvation, isolation, and the greatest mystery in early American history: the journey across the Atlantic. The sea in 1587 was not a friendly place. Ships were slow and fragile, the ocean unpredictable. The waves could turn deadly overnight, and disease often spread faster than the wind. Still, 117 men, women, and children boarded 3 ships: the Lion, the Roebuck, and the Flyboat. They were not soldiers, they were families, ordinary English people chasing an extraordinary dream. Among them was Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter, pregnant with her first child. She would soon give birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. Their journey took over 2 months. By the time the wooden masts of their ships appeared on the horizon of Roanoke Island, their supplies were already running low. But when they landed, they found something strange. The small military outpost built by earlier explorers was abandoned, silent except for the sound of wind moving through empty huts. No signs of a struggle, no bodies, just emptiness. Still, they rebuilt. They planted crops. They repaired the palisades. They hoped. But fate was not on their side. The shadow of the natives. The local tribes, particularly the Secotans and the Croatoans, were wary. Earlier English expeditions had ended badly. Some natives had been killed, others had been kidnapped. Trust was fragile. At first, there was cautious friendship. The settlers traded for food and furs, but tension grew as resources ran low. One misunderstanding, one spark, could turn peace into chaos. And soon, it did. After a series of conflicts, the settlers found themselves isolated. They had neither the manpower nor the food to survive the coming winter. John White made the painful decision to return to England for supplies, promising to come back as soon as possible. He left behind his daughter, his granddaughter Virginia Dare, and more than 100 souls waiting for salvation. He did not know that when he came back, he would never see them again. The return that came too late. It should have been a quick trip, but the seas were ruled by war. England was preparing to defend itself against the mighty Spanish Armada, and every ship was needed for battle. White's return was delayed, not for months, but for 3 long years. When he finally sailed back in 1590, the island came into view again. The same coastline, the same silence, But something was wrong. The fort was gone, the houses dismantled. No signs of a struggle, no bones, no weapons, nothing. And then the word, carved into a wooden post, Croatoan.
The mystery deepens. White's heart raced. He knew the Croatoan tribe lived on an island south of Roanoke, modern-day Hatteras Island. Could the colonists have moved there? Were they still alive? A storm approached, furious and fast. His ship's crew refused to risk the journey, and before they could reach Croatoan, the sea forced them to turn back to England. John White never saw his family again. He died years later, never knowing what became of them. The colony was lost. But the story had only just begun. Twisting tips and tricks, theories, legends, and clues. For centuries, historians, archaeologists, and storytellers have tried to solve the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke. Did the settlers join the Croatoan tribe, adopting their way of life? Were they starved and perished in the wilderness? Were they taken captive by other tribes? Or was there something else, something darker, that erased them from history? Clues have surfaced. Carvings, stones, DNA traces, even artifacts that suggest some English settlers may have survived for decades, blending into native society. But the truth? Still uncertain. The name Croatoan would later appear in eerie places, carved in trees, written in journals, whenever something or someone vanished mysteriously in early America. It became more than a word. It became a curse. The legacy of a lost dream. Despite the tragedy, the Roanoke colony laid the foundation for England's next attempt, Jamestown, founded in 1607. This time, they would survive. They would learn from Roanoke's failure, and the dream of America would take root again. But Roanoke remains an open wound in the pages of history, a reminder of how fragile the line is between hope and despair, courage and disappearance. Even now, more than 4 centuries later, explorers still search the soil of North Carolina, hoping to find one piece of evidence, one whisper from the past that can tell us what really happened to Virginia Dare and her vanished colony. Hook for Part 2. What if the answer has been hidden in plain sight, buried beneath the forests of the Carolinas, in symbols carved by both English hands and native spirits? What if Roanoke didn't vanish, but transformed into something the world wasn't ready to understand?
The forest remembers even when men forget. When the English vanished from Roanoke Island, the world moved on, or tried to, but the land didn't forget. The trees, the soil, the rivers, they held their secrets in silence. For the next 3 centuries, whispers of the lost colony flickered through American folklore like ghost lights over the Carolina marshes. The New World becomes a nation. By the time the 13 colonies rose against the British crown, Roanoke had become more legend than fact. Soldiers, settlers, and slaves all knew fragments of the story. A lost people, they said, swallowed by the wilderness. Yet even in 1776, locals around the Outer Banks told tales of pale-skinned Indians, people who spoke fragments of Old English prayers and carried strange handmade crosses. Were these the descendants of the lost colony? No one could say for sure, but the rumors refused to die.
When America declared independence, it inherited not only a new identity, but also its first unsolved mystery. The Age of Discovery Reborn. In the 1800s, as trains and telegraphs stitched the young nation together, history itself became a frontier. Scholars began digging into old archives, maps, and journals. Among them was Beverly Tucker, a historian obsessed with the mystery of Roanoke. In 1839, he stood before the ruins of a colonial fort, moss-covered, silent, and decayed, and whispered, "They were not lost, they were left." That phrase haunted him. What if the colonists didn't vanish? What if they simply adapted, absorbed into the native tribes who had once been their enemies? Tucker spent decades studying oral traditions among the Lumbee people of North Carolina. Many Lumbee families carried English surnames: Dare, Berry, Sampson. Some had gray eyes, unusual in the region, and some even claimed descent from the white people of Roanoke. Was it myth or memory? The Lumbee legend. Among the Lumbee elders, there was an old saying, "We came from the sea, we mixed our blood with the lost ones." They spoke of visitors from across the ocean, starving, desperate, guided by a woman with yellow hair and a baby on her hip. She was called Wena Dare, meaning the White Mother. Could this be Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter? Stories passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation, tell of how the tribe took pity on the survivors, teaching them to hunt and grow maize. The English settlers, in return, shared tools, words, and prayers. By the mid-1600s, the descendants of this union spoke a language unlike any other, a blend of English and Algonquian. It was history, hiding in plain sight. The Dare Stones. Then, in 1937, the mystery returned to life. A tourist traveling through Georgia found a strange stone covered in weathered carvings. The message, written in archaic English, began, "Ananias Dare and Virginia went hence unto heaven, 1591. Whosoever delivereth this stone to John White, father of the Lost Colony, seek ye not vengeance." The writer signed it E.W.D., Eleanor White Dare. The press exploded. "The Lost Colony found," screamed the headlines. Dozens of similar stones surfaced soon after, each describing a journey, the settlers leaving Roanoke, traveling inland, suffering attacks, and dying one by one. If true, the stones were the greatest archaeological discovery in early American history, but skeptics questioned them. Were they authentic or an elaborate hoax? Modern tests have never given a definitive answer. Some believe a few may be genuine, others dismiss them all as clever fabrications. Yet the message, a mother's final words carved in stone, still chills the soul. "My child and I wait in heaven. Our sins were survival." The archaeologist's discovery. Fast forward to 2015. On the quiet banks of Albemarle Sound, archaeologist Eric Klingelhofer uncovered fragments of 16th century English pottery, tools, and weapons 50 miles inland from Roanoke Island. They shouldn't have been there. The location matched markings on an old Elizabethan map drawn by John White himself. A small patch had been covered with a square, possibly hiding a secret fort site. Klingelhofer called it Site X. It suggested that at least part of the lost colony had moved inland, seeking safer ground. Nearby, he found artifacts from Native American settlements, mingled with unmistakable English goods. A copper ring of Tudor design, fragments of English earthenware, flintlock gun parts. The evidence was clear. The English and the local tribes had lived together. But for how long? And what became of their descendants? The fire that never died. Historians began to weave a new theory, not of disappearance, but transformation. Perhaps the colonists had merged with native communities, forming hybrid societies that later faded into the vast waves of migration and war that reshaped America. That would mean the lost colony never truly vanished. It became part of the nation's DNA. And perhaps that's why their story lingers, in names, legends, and faces scattered across the Carolinas. The modern echoes. In 2007, a team from the British Museum digitally analyzed John White's original 1580s maps. Under layers of parchment, invisible to the naked eye, they discovered a faint red symbol, the same shape as Fort Raleigh, but drawn miles inland. The note beneath it? A single letter, M. Was it a secret code for mainland? Or perhaps the first letter of a hidden settlement's name, Metaquem, the ancient word for refuge? No one knows. But archaeologists today believe at least two groups of colonists split from Roanoke, one south toward Croatoan, one inland toward the Chowan River. Maybe some survived for decades. Maybe they lived, loved, and died among their native hosts. Maybe their bones still rest beneath the pines of North Carolina, mingled, unmarked, but not forgotten. A nation haunted by its first mystery. Even now, the word Croatoan carries a strange energy in American folklore. It has appeared at scenes of disappearance, the final entry in Edgar Allan Poe's notebook, carved into a post where a vanished ship was last docked in 1888, whispered in ghost stories and horror shows. Coincidence? Or the echo of something the land still remembers? The end that wasn't. John White's lost dream of a New World settlement ended in silence, but that silence seeded something larger, the resilience that built a nation. The colonists may have vanished, but their spirit became part of America's foundation, the courage to cross oceans, to risk everything for the unknown, to keep faith even when surrounded by mystery. Maybe the real story of Roanoke isn't about disappearance. Maybe it's about rebirth. A colony lost, but a people found.
The year was 2023. On the edge of Hatteras Island, where the Atlantic roars against broken dunes, a team of researchers set up camp for the night. Their goal? To find the final trace of the Roanoke settlers. They were not treasure hunters. They were scientists, historians, linguists, and archaeologists armed with drones, sonar, and scanners. But what they would uncover was something far older, far stranger than anything they expected. The whisper beneath the sand. Dr. Eleanor Hayes, a historical linguist from Boston, had been obsessed with one word since childhood, Croatoan. Her grandmother had whispered it as a bedtime warning. "Never say that word at sea," she'd said, "or the waves will remember you." Now, standing on that very island, Eleanor felt a strange pull in her chest, like the wind itself carried memories. Beneath her boots lay centuries of buried stories. The air was heavy with salt and silence. Even the waves seemed to pause. Then one of the diggers shouted. They had found something, a wooden post blackened with age, carved deep with the same letters, Croatoan. The hollow ground. As night fell, the team unearthed a ring of stones arranged in a perfect circle. Their formation didn't match any native pattern, nor English. Each stone had faint carvings, symbols that looked half Christian, half tribal. Eleanor ran her fingers across one of them. The edges were sharp, too clean to be ancient. Someone, or something, had tended to this site in the last few decades. Then the wind shifted. It carried whispers, not voices, not quite, but a rhythmic sound, like breath over hollow wood. The team thought it was the sea, but when they checked their instruments, the readings spiked. There was something below. Ground-penetrating radar revealed an empty chamber 20 feet down. They dug. The Vault of Names. The chamber was lined with cedar planks, perfectly preserved by the sand. Inside lay relics no one expected to find. A rusted sword of Tudor steel, a cracked baby's rattle carved from bone, and an English locket engraved with a name barely legible, Virginia D. Eleanor froze. Virginia Dare, the child born in the New World, the first of her kind. But what chilled her wasn't the locket. It was the wall behind it, carved with hundreds of names. Some were English, some native, some combinations of both. Whitefeather, Samson Dare, Croatoan. It was a record of bloodlines, a list of those who had become one.
The fire that cleansed. The team reported the find to the university, but within a week, their site burned. Every tent, every camera, every note, gone. Locals blamed lightning, but Eleanor knew the sky had been clear that night. A fisherman told her, "You don't dig there. That land's already spoken for." When she pressed him, the old man said something she never forgot. "They weren't lost, miss. They were taken by the island itself." The Croatoan line. Months later, back in Boston, Eleanor began tracing DNA samples collected from Lumbee families. She expected partial English ancestry. She found more, too much more. A genetic marker appeared across several families that didn't match any known European or native lineage, a sequence that seemed to originate in Roanoke, then vanish from history. She called it the Croatoan line. It appeared once every few generations, then disappeared like a ghost in the genome. The modern haunting. In 2025, a hurricane, one of the worst in modern history, slammed into the Carolina coast. When the storm cleared, locals reported something impossible. Dozens of ancient posts and stones uncovered by the waves, each one marked with the same word, Croatoan. Journalists came, scientists came, but the night after the storm, a blue light was seen moving over the marsh, drifting slow and steady toward the old fort site. Some said it was lightning. Others swore it looked like a lantern carried by a woman with yellow hair and a child beside her. The island that breathes. Today, Roanoke remains quiet, but archaeologists working in the region still find anomalies, mixed artifacts, hybrid tools, and symbols that defy classification. Every time they dig deeper, the soil gives up something half English, half native, half forgotten. Maybe that's what the word truly meant, not a curse, but a transformation. Croatoan, the place where they became one. The lost colony was never lost. It changed shape, form, and blood, and became part of America's living memory.
The storm had passed, but the island wasn't quiet anymore. At dawn, the air over Hatteras shimmered with something unseen, like heat rising from sand, but colder. The marshes hissed softly, as if exhaling after a long sleep. Dr. Eleanor Hayes stood where the vault had once been. Now it was buried again, swallowed by the same earth that had kept it secret for centuries. But in her mind, she could still hear it, that hollow breath beneath the ground. The Keeper's Journal. Weeks later, while reviewing recovered drone footage from before the fire, Eleanor noticed something she'd missed. Just before the flames erupted, a faint figure appeared at the edge of the camp. A man, barefoot, wearing animal skins and a necklace of carved shells. He wasn't part of the team. He vanished the moment lightning struck the frame. But the camera had caught one thing. The man's arm bore a tattoo, a cross entwined with a spiral. She'd seen it before, on one of the stones inside the vault. Eleanor tracked the symbol through archives, eventually finding it in a single obscure journal, written in 1712 by a man named Matthew Dare, keeper of the old ways. The pages described an island that eats memory, and a people who speak in both tongues, the words of the white and the whisper of the crow. At the bottom of one entry was a phrase in Latin, sanguis meminit, the blood remembers. Determined to prove the find was real, Eleanor returned to the coast with a smaller team. They set up near the remains of Fort Raleigh. That night, they recorded strange vibrations under the soil, rhythmic pulses that repeated every few minutes, like a heartbeat. When they converted the frequencies to sound, a pattern emerged. It wasn't noise. It was a voice, distorted, low, and old. The translation software caught fragments of English mixed with Algonquin. We remain beneath. The fire cleanses. The circle must not break. One of the team members refused to stay another night. The rest pressed on. The next morning, Eleanor found fresh footprints around the dig, bare, adult, and child-sized. They led toward the forest, ending at a new stone circle. This one was smaller, newer, and at its center lay a small clay tablet inscribed with a single word, remember.
Eleanor took it as a message or a warning. The Bloodline Revelation. Back at her lab, Eleanor continued to test DNA samples from the Croatoan line. She found something impossible. The genetic sequence seemed to adapt when exposed to salt water, as if it reacted to the environment itself. It wasn't just ancestry, it was evolution, guided by the island. She began to suspect that the Roanoke settlers hadn't simply merged with the local tribes. They had become something new, a hybrid people, bonded to the land that took them in. The Return. That night, Eleanor dreamt of a shoreline lit by ghostly fireflies. A woman with golden hair stood there, the same figure seen in countless legends. In her arms, she carried a small child. "Why do you keep calling us lost?" the woman asked. Her voice was calm, ancient, and sad. "We were never lost. We were found and forgotten." When Eleanor awoke, her computer screen flickered on by itself. Across every open file appeared the same word, repeating endlessly, Croatoan. The Awakening. By 2026, strange reports began to spread across the Outer Banks. Boaters saw lights moving under the water, not machines, but lantern-like glows that moved in patterns. Locals heard singing from the dunes during fog.
and several tourists vanished, leaving behind their footprints circling endlessly in the sand. Eleanor returned to the island one last time. She brought nothing but her journal and a recording device. The last message she sent was a whisper. "The blood remembers. The land speaks. We never lost them. They found a way to stay." Then her signal went silent. Weeks later, her empty boat washed ashore. Inside, investigators found a single carved word on the wooden deck: "Remember." Epilogue: The Land That Keeps Its Secrets. To this day, the sand dunes of Hatteras shift and whisper. Sometimes after storms, you can still see shapes, the outlines of posts, the ghosts of walls. And if you walk there at twilight, the air itself hums, not like wind, but like breath, steady, ancient, waiting. The island doesn't forget. It remembers for us all.